I want to welcome you all. Thank you for coming to our second webinar in our series surrounding the policy brief that we recently published and shared. Um, Today's webinar is titled Enhancing New York State's Pk-12 Teacher and Leader Preparation to Support Immigrant Students, and looking forward to hearing from some really great panelists today. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. Today's panelists are Italo Baldassare, who is a principal in Niagara Falls, New York, Ashley Buson Rodriguez, a bilingual third grade teacher in New York City, William Murphy or Bill Murphy, who's the Deputy Commissioner for Higher Education in the New York State Education Department, and Cecilia Espinosa, the Chair of the Department of Early Childhood and Childhood Studies at Lehman College, CUNY. And want to welcome all the panelists today. Excited to hear from what they have to offer to us all. And next slide. Um, we are here, of course, with CUNY-IIE, the City University of New York's initiative on immigration and education. At CUNY-IIE, we work to learn about current immigration issues, act in ways that center our collective humanity, and advocate for equitable policies for all people, regardless of immigration status. So the work really exists on the intersection of immigration and education, which is aligned with the policy brief that we've put out and the policy issues that we're discussing. Next slide. The CUNY-IIE grounding principles I find to be really profound. I would encourage you all to take the time to read all of them. These are really foundational to the work that we do and underscore the issues that we present and the way that we interact with the work ahead of us. You can find these on our website, which will also be linked in the chat, as well as in the slides in the next slide or two, I think. I won't read them all for time's sake, but I encourage you all to take the time to go to our website, read these if you have not already. We can go to the next slide. These are available in multiple languages, again, on our website, so feel free to explore that for yourself. Next slide. And again, this is our website, which will be, linked in the chat as well, so please feel free to explore the resources available. Next slide. So what we're here for today to talk about the policy brief. So this policy brief co-authored with myself and Tamara Alsace, but also the entire policy team at CUNY-IIE. It is titled Enhancing Educational Equity for Immigrant Students in New York State. And there are three key policy areas that we focused on. Webinar 1 looked at policy area 1. This is webinar 2, so we're looking at policy area 2. So for those of you who attended our last one, Policy Area 1 was centered around pathways to careers for education and education for undocumented aspiring educators. And today we're talking about teacher and leader preparation. And go ahead and go to the next slide. So in teacher and leader preparation, we're looking at, as well as all of our policy areas, the issues, potential solutions, and what would those solutions take to achieve. And so the issues around teacher and leader preparation that we found were that the currently existing preparation programs are not necessarily required to provide the content on immigration issues that are relevant and necessary, thus happening that the educators then enter the field perhaps not fully equipped or prepared to teach their immigrant students, also knowing the issues that affect their students. And so in the absence of that culturally and linguistically sustaining information, educators and school leaders can potentially form impressions of their immigrant students based on negative information. And I think that is really key in this current moment that we're seeing when there is some really profoundly negative rhetoric around our immigrant students that we have to confront, really intensely and ensure that educators are prepared to serve their immigrant students despite the information coming out that is really making folks feel very fearful in this moment. So that's the issue around teacher and leader preparation. And next slide. So some potential solutions that we've discussed would be around mandating topics within the existing courses for New York State teachers, about how to best educate immigrant origin students in ways that are affirming, that are inclusive, as well as bi multilingual. Also to require yearly in-school professional development, to continue that learning, as well, finally, as requiring hours focused on immigrant-focused, trauma-informed practices to support students across the spectrum of academic as well as non-academic issues that are present in the classroom. Next slide. And so thinking about policy area, what will it take? At the state level, that would require a change to the certification requirements, as well as the collaboration with NYS and institutions of higher education that provide those educator preparation programs. Additionally, policies mandating immigration-focused and trauma-informed professional development for districts and schools would then require an amendment, as well as amendments to the governing CTLE or continuing teacher and leader education requirements. And then districts could review and amend their school-based comprehensive and professional development plans to ensure that immigration is included so that schools can develop and enact those practices that best serve their immigrant students. So that's a lot of information. Next slide. And the purpose of this webinar is to really discuss at a granular level some of those different areas of the policy area number 2 around teacher and leader preparation. So I provided a really macro level view at this specific policy area. Again, I encourage you to read the brief. And we're fortunate enough to hear from some folks who have, I think, a lot to offer and a lot to say around these areas specifically. So without further ado, I will jump into some of the questions and we'll jump into some of the discussion and we'll have some Q&A at the end. So the first question that I want to ask will be really to any panelist who would like to respond. It's not a specific one. I think we would be remiss to not talk about this current moment and what we're facing, what teachers are facing, what students and families are facing. So the question one is, given the recent executive orders that have removed schools as sensitive locations for immigration enforcement, how then can teacher preparation programs and or district professional development better equip educators to protect immigrant students in the classroom, whether that's training, policies, what's necessary to ensure that our students feel safe and supported, particularly in this moment with heightened fear around ICE presence in schools. And I'll open that to any panelist who would like to respond.
I can start, Rachel. Thanks for having me. I was thinking about this morning, and I know that Paulo Freire wrote a lot about how folks often talk about and to teachers, but not with them. So thanks to CUNY-IIE for including me on this important discussion. I think it's really important to be talking with teachers about this moment. I sat right there. I'm in my classroom right now. I sat right there and had this conversation with a child this morning who told me that he's really nervous that ICE is going to come into our school and take him away. So we're doing this work daily, and it's obviously very upsetting, but I think the most important thing to remember right now is that we need very clear, specific, and updated communication from our leaders that is unique to our state and or county regarding how to interact with law enforcement. So as educators, we already have so much on our plates. There's a lot coming at us every day. So this is just way too important to overlook. We need these clear, concise messages. My principal, for example, writes a weekly message to all of her staff. She has started to include this sort of information in that document. She's always leaving time at staff meetings for building in questions about this and our leadership team. I think the most important underlying theme here is that we can't be expected to learn and keep ourselves up to date on the fly. And so we need our administrators, we need our leaders to be leaving space and time and giving us resources to do that, and giving those resources to families as well, right? They need to know what to expect and exactly how safe their children might be while at school. They need to know that folks at school are familiar with the laws and the processes. So I think that idea of explicit time that is set aside and clear and concise messaging is really important.
If I can just continue the line that you started there. I know that the state has provided guidance. I know that there are policy documents involved. I can speak for our district and state that they have been really clear in stating the expectations to the administrators, and that's filtered on down to all of our staff. I think what what I have really thought about, and I think that teacher preparation programs really need to think about, is that this is just another in a list of multiple insecurities that already exist for students, especially students that are immigrant students or new to the community. And we could go on about food insecurity and home insecurity and the typical insecurities that exist for any adolescent, especially at the middle level where I am today. We need to understand that our work, although it's guided by policy and law, that ultimately we have to have a heart, and focusing in on being trauma informed and being prepared to address whatever needs come to our door, I think is paramount, especially at the secondary level. And I'll make this short. That a lot of times I think new teachers think that the content is the most important thing. And what we need to realize is that the content may not be the most important thing in a child's life, and that we have to be prepared as educators, as a school, and as a system to address all of those needs, and realize that our priorities as educators may not be the same priorities as our students that are living their daily lives.
Now, I'm going to add from a teacher preparation program perspective that protecting what I want and what we want the students, prospective teachers to know is that we have the 1982 Plyer versus Doe decision, and that students cannot be denied a free public education. We have from CUNY-IIE learned a lot about the importance of advocating, acting, and learning from immigrant origin communities and the schools that work with them. I want to highlight that CUNY-IIE has a section for Know Your Rights for educators as well as for families that can be translated into 6 different languages. So certainly teacher education programs can draw from that right now. And this idea that also the New York State Department of Education and the New York City Department of Education has offered us guidelines in that our students, our practicing teachers need to be updated with all of this information. And I think as Italo and Ashley talked about, I think the most important thing is that what makes the school safe for children and adolescents is the people. And so that to keep a school safe and to keep students safe so that they can learn and grow in a learning space where they can thrive, we need a strong partnership with families. And if families are afraid to come to school, we cannot afford to lose that partnership and that relationship that we have with them. And this time is crucial for that.
So my next question that I'm going to move is directed to Italo. If you could share, based on your perspective, based on your position currently as a school leader, tell us a bit more about your school specifically and what challenges you have faced at your school in providing support for immigrant origin students.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. LaSalle Preparatory School is a 7th and 8th grade school. We have about 540 students that are very diverse. We draw from both urban and suburban areas in Niagara Falls. We have a population that's 56% minority, and about 75% of our students are currently living in poverty. We have 40 English as a new language students. We have 12 immigrant families who have come into the community in the last 5 years, and we have 6 families that have come in this year. And they're speaking Spanish and Urdu and Swahili and Arabic and Bengali. And it's a challenge for our staff, obviously, in the content areas, but also a challenge for our lone ENL teacher who is providing services to all of those students in multiple content areas. Probably the biggest challenge that we face is establishing trusting relationships with families. They're coming from places all over the world where their relationship with authority may not be a good one. We have refugee students who have come from horrible conditions, and to try to win them over, to let them know that we are here to support their children and not to be an agent of the government or things that may be happening politically in the country has been a challenge. As a district and as a building, we've tried to be proactive with that. We have several community events that we host throughout the year to try to bring families together. We are doing home visits and reaching out to families as frequently as possible. Obviously, language being a barrier and a challenge that we're willing to work through. We have the benefit of some district liaisons that have been contracted. One of the best that we're working with is Native Language Services, which works with our Spanish families. And to have somebody that can go into the home and reach out to the families in their native language has been a great help to us in building those relationships. And when we've had difficulty establishing those relationships, it's made it difficult for us to identify what the needs of the students are and to proceed in a way that's going to benefit them. For example, just last week, I was speaking to Mrs. Grande, our ENL teacher, who brought to my attention that a student who has not been attending regularly has been home because she's been providing childcare for younger siblings while her mother is undergoing cancer treatment and her father has to work to support the family. And those are things that, because of a lack of a relationship and the language barrier, we were unaware of for almost a year. And obviously, we're doing everything we can to support that family at this time. But not knowing that initially, has made it harder for us to meet their needs. So that's probably the main challenge that we face is trust, communication, and building relationships.
Thank you. And can I ask a follow-up question as well, and then we'll move to the next panelist. Have there been any specific training programs or like professional development that has been helpful that you or your staff has found helpful? And has the district provided any of that guidance or support?
Yes, there is a district-wide focus on trauma-informed care. And we are currently partnering with the UB School of Social Work. And we're receiving not only general training, but also targeted training in building what we're calling champion teams, both staff champion teams and student champion teams in our buildings, so that we can make sure that our approach to every family is utilizing universal precautions, to being thoughtful in the talk that we use, so that we're not triggering any families based on the histories that they're bringing, but also making sure that we are doing everything we can to develop a welcoming atmosphere. And again, we're doing that with staff and with our students together. And the district has been a driving force in that. And I know that every district employee has received training, and we do have targeted training here.
Thank you. This next question I would like to offer directly to Ashley. If you could share, in your experience, what are the main barriers your immigrant origin students are facing in accessing resources and support within schools? And then how can educators work with school leadership to better advocate for the needs of your students?
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. I'd like to echo what Italo was saying, that, regardless of a policy that says that we must do these things, we can do them right now, right? This is the difference between formal and informal policy. So when we know best practices for trauma-informed practice, we can participate in these important parts of teaching, right? Rather than just content. So when you went through the guiding principles, Rachel, you mentioned that one of them is migration can be traumatic. And I think, neuroscience teaches us that we physically cannot learn when we are stressed, right? So I would argue that stress and PTSD are the #1 barriers to learning that our immigrant origin students are facing right now. I think the uncertainty and the unpredictability of our political landscape is simply not conducive to learning, right? And as Italo mentioned, it's just another to add to the list of insecurities, right? We're already dealing with food and housing insecurities, family insecurities. So here are some ways that I think that we can support our students. We can hire more mental health professionals in our schools, right? What if we allocated money for mental health instead instead of for test preparation? What if we made decisions as a community around the well-being of humans in our schools rather than these decidedly capitalistic and short-sighted data points that standardized testing can supply, right? I would be really curious to know about in New York State, how much money is spent yearly on writing, administering, and scoring the New York State standardized tests that our students take versus how much money is spent on ensuring that students feel safe and cared for and have adequate mental health support at school. In 2023, just here in New York City, we have around 900,000 students enrolled in our New York City schools, not including charters. And there were only about 2,000 social workers, according to our press office at the DOE. So that's one social worker for every 450 to 500 students. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of students who are struggling. And when we know data points from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network says that 2/3 of all youth in this country have endured a traumatic event. Not just of them are immigrant students, but 2/3 of all youth, right? So if you know that 2/3 of those children are dealing with PTSD potentially and don't have the support at school and may not have the support in the community, then it's up to us as educators to be stepping in. So I do think that we need to be training all educators, teachers, support staff, interventionists in trauma-informed practices, right? Just like Italo mentioned best practices in his district. I would love that because I think that when we know better, we do better, right? And I'm very proud to be an educator in New York State, but I'm also the product of a New York State school that did not know better, right? So the trauma that I endured in my own elementary school, it was avoidable. Right? Things happened to me there that shouldn't have happened. My teachers could have done better. And now it's time for us to do better for our students. And we don't need policy to tell us that. We know that, right? We need resources. We need time, especially to be creating safe and predictable environments in our schools where students know and understand the safety measures that are being taken to protect them. We need to spend time building these trusting relationships between family coordinators, families, students, educators. All of this takes a lot of effort, right? This is not an overnight process, so it takes time and we need to be given the time to do that. We need to prioritize time in our schedules for family engagement and for social emotional learning. I would say prioritize that over some of the content that is being shoved at us, right, as educators. I think also Italo mentioned that trauma-informed practices are universally designed, right? So these are going to benefit all of our students, not just the ones who've endured trauma. And again, this is not rocket science, right? These are things that we already know how to do. We just need the time and the resources and the reminders to do them. We need the structure to back us up. So policy would be great. Yes, I would love for that. I worked on these policies, right? I feel really passionate about them, but I would argue that most educators already want to do these things and that we would do them if we had the time and the space. We can make the policy come alive before the lawmakers do, right? So I think I would want to just add 3 things if I have a moment, Rachel. To say that I think we all know that human beings thrive on predictability, on consistency, and on trusting relationships, right? And these are some of the cornerstones of trauma-informed practice. So if you think about your day today, if you just take a moment and think, hopefully you had a routine, right? Hopefully you had what you knew you would wake up and do in the morning. You had a loved one or a close friend to confide in through the tougher moments in your day. Ideally, you know exactly what you'll do right after this meeting to go and wind down. So we need to be creating structures like that in our schools to replicate this for youth and for adults alike. Things like visual schedules, maps, buddy or mentoring systems for all students. These are easy to implement. These are things that are not difficult. Many of us already do them. We just didn't know. We didn't have the background information to know it's a trauma-informed practice. It's important to make time for that. We need to be making time for daily routine structures around social emotional learning. So this could look like advisory periods in secondary school. It could look like morning meeting in elementary. All people, all human beings crave time to share and to ask questions about things that are happening in the world, right? So it's important that we as educators are setting the stage to show children that your questions matter. We will try to find answers together. We're here to support you. We need advanced notice of changes to the schedule. Children really thrive on predictability. All humans really thrive on predictability. I want to know ahead of time if something is going to be different. We need clear expectations for learning and for behavior. We need predictable and logical consequences. Children need to know what will happen if I don't follow through, right? What will happen if I don't meet this expectation? I'm not going to be hit. I'm not going to be sent outside of the classroom. Here are the expectations in this environment, and this is what it looks like. And just finally, I'll end on my favorite quote. Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, who's a sociologist, invites us to become curious rather than furious about the behaviors of our students. I really love that. Becoming curious rather than furious about the behaviors of our students. So we know that behavior is communication and that challenging behaviors are likely exposing a big area of need for someone. We need to adopt a curious mindset. We need to learn about our students and their families and before we act in ways that are judgmental or punitive. So in short, to recap, let students be places where children and adults can establish a sense of control when the world is so out of control, right? Give children choices, encourage agency and reflection upon those choices, and provide predictable structures during this time of really volatile change.
Ashley, can I recruit you to come teach in Niagara Falls?
Sure, let's talk. Yeah.
All right.
And truly, thank you, Ashley. I think this is just underscoring the power of having a panel as wonderful as this. And so with that, Bill, I'd like to ask you the next question. Being that in your opinion, what role can state education regulations play in ensuring that immigrant origin students have access to higher education, especially considering the barriers they face in navigating the college admissions process? And what additional resources, policy changes would be necessary to support that transition from high school to college?
Yeah, thank you. And a lot of great discussion and thoughts so far that really resonate on a lot of the initiatives we've been working on across P-12 and higher education. And this is really timely, I have to tell you, because not only is it really dealing with the emergent issues that we've been trying to make sure that we're getting our arms around and getting messaged out to our school districts and campuses, but we're also in the early stages of what we call our statewide plan for higher education. This is really an 8-year strategic plan, a forward-looking document. And we need to ensure that we're looking at all the important trends, policies, and regulatory priorities that relate to our immigrant origin students and our migrant students. We need to make sure that we're doing this in a comprehensive way. And so we determined the only way to do that is to take what we call a P20 approach to this, which leverages all the necessary partnerships and resources across our school districts, our colleges, our community and workforce partners. As many of you know, a little over 5 years ago, New York State adopted the Jose Peralta DREAM Act, which allows for undocumented students to access New York State scholarships and funding. We also ensure that these students have access to our many different proactive opportunity programs. Some of you may have heard we've got programs like C-STEP and STEP, which are our STEM programs for underrepresented and under-resourced students. And then we have our more general education opportunity programs, which ensure that we're targeting students who may have some academic or economic challenges in order to access higher education. And so, again, very important that we're paying attention to these issues and then tying them into a lot of the policies. So it's a great time of the year right here, especially it's budget time. And it's time for us to look at what takes stock of all the existing resources and policies and regulations that are affecting our programs. And so we need to look to see whether we need to maintain or increase a lot of our programmatic support for these immigrant origin students. At present, we have a very extensive network of supports at our college campuses and in our public sector colleges. Both SUNY and CUNY have dedicated offices and centers to support and serve our immigrant and migrant students. We also have unique P20 partnerships, such as our clinically rich intensive teacher institutes. These seek to increase the number of teachers who serve our growing ENL and bilingual students. We've also been engaged in making significant reforms to our teacher certification system, creating more streamlined and flexible certification pathways for our TESOL and bilingual extension educators. So again, it's really this comprehensive policy, regulatory, and funding model that helps us ensure that we're leaders in New York State in supporting our first and second generation immigrant students, in addition to our migrant and undocumented students. And then real quick, just to offer a quick example of how this goes across the P-12 and the higher ed sector from both the policy and regulatory agenda. Right now, we're actually looking at our regulations that relate to professional development and professional learning plans for our teachers. And we want to integrate and make sure that it's required that they're consistent with what we put out as our culturally responsive, sustaining education framework. We've already done this in our educator preparation programs, where we've introduced for our teacher performance assessments that are required of our educator preparation programs, that they incorporate the CRSE. And then again, the reason why we're probably one of the leaders in being considered like a comprehensive access and support model for our immigrant origin students is because we've already got a lot of policies in place. If you look at our continuing teacher and leader ed regulations, you'll notice that we've set aside a certain amount. They have to do, if they have certain titles that relate to reading, literacy, and literacy attainment, they have to make sure that they're putting aside a certain amount of those professional development hours to focus on the latest with evidence-based literacy and English language acquisition. And so again, there's a lot more initiatives we've got going on, something called the Path Forward Initiative, working across our educator preparation programs and districts, for these important issues. But again, we want to make sure that we're hearing from all the stakeholders engaged in this, even including our students, families, to make sure that we do indeed remain a leader in, being considered one of those comprehensive access and support states for our immigrant origin students.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And the next question that I have directed to Cecilia, thinking about the complexities of working with immigrant origin students, I think we've heard from so many different perspectives at this point, especially thinking about our undocumented and mixed status families. How can universities collaborate with K-12 schools to bridge that gap in teacher preparation?
Thank you, Rachel. So certainly universities can collaborate in several ways to bridge this gap in teacher preparation programs. As they work with schools who are working with immigrant origin students or undocumented, and particularly undocumented students or mixed status families. And so one of the first ones I would say is to engage in dialogue with the school. And I'm going to give you some illustrative examples. With the fans from CUNY-IIE, we spent some time dialoguing with different elementary schools. And the purpose was to learn from each other. So it wasn't that the university was coming to tell the school what to do. We studied the CUNY-IIE principles together. We examined the needs of immigrant origin population at the school. And we created goals with the aim of really enhancing the school's work with the immigrant origin population of that particular school. And so certainly this idea of forming partnerships between university faculty and schools is a very powerful way. I think also that schools who have participated in the CUNY-IIE project could serve as mentors to other schools. One of the goals for one of the schools that we work with was to establish deeper relationship with community organizations. And so we organized a community fair. And what was really fascinating about this community fair that now happens every year was that the community organizations also learned a lot about the school. They learned about the needs of the school, but also the strengths of the schools. So it became a two-way event, and it became a space for mutual collaboration that remains even after the CUNY-IIE project has left. And we have some great videos from CUNY-IIE. They're called Not Too Young, Immigration in Elementary School video series that sort of illustrate some of this work. We take at CUNY-IIE the stance that immigration experience is complicated. And I think that taking that from a teacher education program is really, really important. It starts really from the reasons why people leave their home countries to the journey, to the experiences that they encounter in the United States. And so certainly, while we don't have an official policy from the state yet, we can certainly collaborate within the university and across universities to develop assignments that are connected to our prospective teacher-student fieldwork experiences. I'm thinking also for principals, for future principals, for school counselors, and the idea would be to help them develop the skills to work with immigrant origin communities, particularly with undocumented students and those who come from mixed status families. So lots of opportunities to learn about the community, and to really form those partnerships. I think that also, as it was said earlier, this idea of learning from a pedagogy that is culturally, linguistically, emotionally, and developmentally appropriate is critical. So we need to ensure that our teachers and our prospective teachers have the strategies to build and sustain on the wealth of linguistic practices that our immigrant origin students bring. And I also want to highlight that on March 8th, we're having a conference that focuses on immigration in children and young adult literature. And so we invite you to come, and we are also preparing a guide because we think also that the while literacy has gotten a very important place in the recent policies, the materials that our students read really matters. They impact, that idea that literature is the illumination of life. So how do we provide for the students current literature about the immigrant experience? Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia, and thank you for plugging the March 8th conference as well. And so before I kind of go into a few more questions, I just want to remind folks who are tuned in watching to use the Q&A box to submit questions if you have any. We'll have a few minutes at the end of the webinar to go through as many questions as we can, so just please use that feature. For this next round of questions, I'll start with someone, but then we'll also open it up to other panelists to add or contribute any thoughts that you have based on that question. So this next question, I will throw it first to Ashley, but also would love to hear from other panelists as well. And so thinking about trauma-informed practices, which many of you have mentioned, and how critical they can be for supporting immigrant origin students who are dealing with a range of experiences, how do you think requiring trauma-informed training as part of professional development can help create a more supportive classroom environment? And what are some of the specific strategies you would want to see emphasized in such a training?
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. I'd love to go beyond the idea that, and again, this is one of our grounding principles, that not all immigrants are English language learners and not all English language learners are immigrants, right? And so I think even though our state is a leader in providing some frameworks for diversifying the CTLE, that continuing teacher and leadership education content, right? As Mr. Murphy noted, we do have that 20-hour requirement. And I guess I want to be a little specific here because I think it's important for us to note that this is over the course of 100 hours over the course of 5 years that teachers with their professional license should receive this kind of education. And the kind of education that's being required is about language acquisition, which is phenomenal and very important because we know that the science is changing, we know that the theories are changing, but and we need to change our practice to meet up. But I think the most important part of that for me is that it's not enough, right? Language acquisition is simply not enough. We know that it does not even affect all immigrant families, right? And so it's very, very important that we go beyond that. The kind of education that I think we need to be offering is this myth-busting education. We need to be talking about the realities of the immigrant experience. We need to be talking about what is legally appropriate, what is legally required. You mentioned Plyler versus Doe. I've had students in my CTLE classes who are New York State professionally educated and certified teachers who do not know about Plyler versus Doe. We need to go back to that. We need to go back to the foundations of culturally responsive and sustaining education. I think also we need to be talking more about appropriate and edifying language to use when we're talking about and with these communities. I've had students come into my CTLE classes, and when I say students, I mean teachers from across New York State who want to receive CTLE hours, using words like illegal to refer to human beings, right? Which we know that no human being is illegal, right? We know that an act could be considered legal or illegal, but that's very debatable, right? And so we need to be using consistently appropriate and edifying language across the state. Educators in Niagara Falls, in New York City, in Long Island, in Albany, in Plattsburgh, we all need to be using the same words. And we ultimately need to address that underlying cause that is trauma, right? And I'll come back to that. I think that that is the really most important piece, the through thread for most of these folks. And I'll just reiterate the same points that I gave at the beginning, that schools need to be places where children and adults can establish a sense of control, right? We need to give students choices. We need to teach them that they are in charge of their own choices, right? And they need to be both have agency over and reflection upon those choices, right? We need to be providing predictable structures. These things are not difficult. They're things that we already do. And I want to highlight and shout out a curriculum that we have on the CUNY-IIE website where you can, for free, go and learn with your learning community about trauma-informed practice. There are so many fantastic resources out there. We've compiled some of them for you, but please, don't wait for a policy to tell you to do this. Dive into this with your learning community now.
And if I could just add a little bit, that the work that we've done in Niagara Falls with trauma-informed care has been transformative. And not only transformative in that we are working to be more aware of the state of our students, but we also need to be, we also have to have a higher awareness of where we are and where we're coming from as a staff. First, understanding that our own state, that state of mind, that our perceptions, right, the way that we see the world and our past experiences has an impact on how we behave and how we're perceived by our students. And care, and I want to thank Ashley for bringing it up, great care has to be taken in the things that we say, especially in the current climate where many of our students may not have a sophisticated understanding of their own family's status. And when there are conversations about, ICE raids or, people having or not having documentation, that it is creating fear and insecurity among students who may have no cause, legally to have that fear. But the talk that they hear, what they see on social media, what they see on television, all have a tremendous impact. So I think that further accentuates how thoughtful we have to be in what we do and what we say to care for our students. So thank you for that, Ashley.
Thank you both. Want to give just a pause if anyone else wants to weigh in on this question around trauma-informed practices, what strategies should be emphasized. So the next question then we'll move into, and again, same format, I will direct it to a panelist, but would love to hear from other folks as well on the panel. Bill, this will be directed to you. And so wanted to think about, from your perspective, what legislation is needed to support these changes in NYS policies that would ensure educators are well prepared to support their immigrant origin students in K-12 schools.
Yeah, thank you. And as many of you know, we actually had our testimony for the K-12 side, and we're about to do our testimony in front of the budget committee toward the third week in February related to higher education and the license of profession. So this is good timing, and this is a great time for us to look at, which funding and regulatory initiatives most closely affect our immigrant origin students, both in K-12 and higher ed. Are there opportunities to ensure the appropriate support for both academic and research-based initiatives such as CUNY-IIE and innovative partnerships like our clinically rich intensive teacher institutes? We have a number of teacher diversity pipeline programs going and grow your own. And then we have a number of initiatives that can be a combination of legislative support and policy and even programmatic structures. As many of you might know, we engage in what we call our Blue Ribbon Commission for graduation measures. And really what they're trying to do there is reimagine what our standards, curricula, and assessments might look like and what's going to be required in order for our students to graduate high school. And we really are trying to take, a much more robust, expansive approach to this. One that's really not just based on, you need to build up a certain amount of Carnegie credits and you need to build up a certain amount of standardized assessments that you passed in order to graduate. And part of this is we've been engaged in a performance learning and assessment network. We've done some pilots with that. And it's really, again, to reimagine, how do we want to approach more creative ways to do curricula to address our ELA, ENL multilingual students? And how do we want to do things that are, again, far more robust than just trying to measure things by like simple, multiple choice exams or doing, courses and curricula, that really are not just not engaging the students and making sure that we are able to incorporate all of these culturally responsive, sustaining practices, our social emotional learning frameworks. We want to build all that into our learning model. And so again, we're looking for a combination of, do we need supports to do this, on the legislative side? Do we need to change policy? But the most important thing is that we've been working real closely across SUNY, CUNY, the school districts, and our community partners to say, how are we going to address this? And then one other small example of this is, you may have seen in last legislative session, they did this universal FAFSA initiative to make sure that we're engaging students while they're in high school, to know that you actually truly do have a lot of access to resources, both state and federal. And so, and this also included our Jose Peralta Dream Act. And, it's not just getting the parents to understand that, that there's value in filling out the FAFSA or Dream Act, but also making sure that there's a lot of support related to navigating, sometimes these things can get very difficult to navigate. So again, just small examples of how we have to deal with this. And then, and that takes into account a lot of the challenges that, with the new administration coming in, and, folks mentioned here before, there's challenges now for like mixed status families and whether they feel safe even filling out a FAFSA form. And so again, we've had to make sure we put our heads together with SUNY and HESC and the partners to say, how are we going to approach this to make sure, our students and families truly do feel safe and supported if they are going to try to engage in a lot of these access and affordability and, transitions from high school to college.
Thank you. Any other folks want to weigh in on the panel around legislation required or necessary? Okay, great. Thank you, Will. Oh, Cecilia, go ahead.
Just that, I think, it's really exciting to hear, Bill, that, there's going to be a transformative vision of how we're preparing teachers, and that it will go beyond, passing the assessments and sort of taking the classes, but really engaging in very mindful ways and thinking about what is it that is needed to prepare a teacher in these times. Thank you.
Wonderful. I think we will turn for a few minutes towards Q&A. If there are any questions from the audience, please put them in the Q&A box now. And if not, then we will go to another question that I have. So I think there's one in the chat that if there's a site that includes all the legal resources that we as teachers are allowed to share with parents and students. Many students ask, and we teachers can feel restricted, especially new hires who may feel their job may be on the line if they do something that can be perceived by administration as crossing a line. Sometimes what the district sends to parents and students is too general and doesn't calm the anxiety of parents and students. I think that sentiment and that question is one that a lot of folks are feeling right now. I know I have personally heard from many teachers asking very similar questions. I will share that at the end of this webinar, we're going to share out a few digital resources for you all to take with you, and that will hopefully answer some of those questions and be useful in the coming days and months. But also want to open to the panelists if folks have other ideas or thoughts or ways to support teachers, particularly new hires, as they navigate these waters with their students and their students' families.
I'm going to add that certainly the CUNY-IIE website, the frequently asked questions for a new teacher, speaks to the current times in very important and timely ways. And it's a site that is updated by one of our team members, Brian Aguilar. And so I think that going to that space, and if we could put that link, is certainly sort of helps the conversation that teachers could have with parents, and in some cases with the children too.
I would encourage people new to the profession to ask as many questions as you can. And not just from outside sources, but from the administrator that you have in your building or your district, your district leadership team. I know that from my perspective as a leader in my school, that if my teachers are doing what's good for kids, they're not going to get anything from me other than the support that I can provide. But asking questions, sharing the challenges that you have, and relying on the experience of those around you that may have dealt with the same thing, I think is the first course and the best resource.
I can definitely appreciate the sentiment behind this question, because I feel like, often we say, if you're not a medical provider, don't give medical advice. And if you're not an attorney, don't give legal advice. But I do think that as teachers, we are often, I think, in fact, today I've provided all kinds of advice to my students that I probably am not qualified to, right? So I think it's important that we are giving, and like I mentioned at the beginning, really consistent, specific, updated information to our teachers. And that starts with our administrators, right? And I am very fortunate to work with an administrator who is wonderful and passionate and up to date and is doing everything that she can do to give us clear information. But if you are not in a district like that, if you are not in a school like that, it's important to connect and build coalition with other folks in your district, other folks in your state, right? Reach out to CUNY-IIE, try to get in touch with us, join one of our CTLE classes. They have really converted into some sort of like a coalition building force, I think, for folks to learn together, for teachers to learn together and build community across the state, especially as we're enduring all of this. So I think the most important thing I want to say is, especially for new educators, don't fall into this idea that you have to be siloed, you have to be alone, you have to figure this all out by yourself. Certainly reach out to folks, because there's a lot of really, really good folks out there that want to help you.
And I want to add that that is also very true for teacher educators, that we need to come together, within universities and across universities. There's a group at CUNY-IIE right now that is working under the leadership of Ariana Mangual-Figueroa to begin to think about how to integrate immigration issues into the course syllabus, and to think about assignments that are relevant. But I think that in the meantime, while the policy is put in place, we can all begin this journey.
Yeah, Rachel, I would just add one more thing, if it's okay. In order for us to make sure that we're being real consistent with, if we're looking to reform like how we want to do education and assessment and pedagogy in our schools, and look at it from like, a new kind of paradigm, we realized early on that we had to even look at reform our whole teacher certification system. And so for those of you who may have seen, it's literally every month for the past 2-3 years, we've had an item on that relates to teacher certification and, creating these real innovative pathways. We've got a lot of folks out there who may have been like in a different career and they want to switch to become a teacher, or we've got candidates who want to take a much more robust model and start getting, paid right away with a certificate where they can get paid. And we call it our residency model. And this residency model is one where it's not just your traditional, they join a teacher prep program and then they take their last semester, of student teaching. This is you engage in a year-long residency student teaching model, and we created a certificate so you can get paid while you're doing it, and you get immersed in the district for the entire year, as opposed to one semester. And the only way that we're able to kind of pull this all together, like under an umbrella of, how is this working with like professional learning plans and professional development and mentoring and bringing on new teachers into districts, especially for our shortage areas like bilingual ed and ELA and STEM. The only way we've been able to do that is to, really engage quarterly with our deans and directors of our ed prep programs. And then we circle back monthly with our districts, with like the BOCES and the DSs and superintendents in our cycle of meetings. But, just to say that, like, we really do need everybody kind of making sure that we bought into this kind of partnership stakeholder model, if we are going to try to go into these more innovative ways to recruit teachers and make sure that we really are addressing sometimes these impossible to fill positions, for students with disabilities teachers, and like I said, a lot of our literacy teachers and STEM and areas like that.
Thank you. I want to highlight a couple things from the chat and then ask our final question from the audience. And so someone asked about the session being recorded. So just to reiterate from the chat that this session is being recorded and will be shared with registrants in a few days. And also that the New York State Association for Bilingual Education is hosting a town hall this Thursday at 7 p.m. And there's a registration link in the chat. And so to end on the last question from the chat, and unfortunately, we're so close on time, so I know no one's going to be able to really do the question justice, but if anyone has some concluding thoughts, a question in the chat is wondering about the role of race and racism in immigration and education, noticing that when one area of equity is highlighted, others tend to fall to the wayside, and how could an intersectional analysis of race and immigration further strengthen Pk-12 teacher and leader preparation to support immigrant origin kids and families? And that's open to whoever wants to try in a few minutes to answer that question.
I'll just say from the state ed perspective, I just want to kind of make it very clear that we are not shying away from the 3 DEI letters. This is front and center, like it's the statewide plan for higher ed that I mentioned. We have 5 main focus areas, starting with making sure that we're growing partnerships across P-12 and college and the workforce. And then the second is ensuring diversity, equity, inclusion, and access in higher education. And there's many different ways that we approach that. The one I mentioned before was we've got a lot of really comprehensive documents related to culturally responsive sustaining education frameworks. In some cases, those are used by districts, and they have their own resources. And then in other cases, we actually incorporate that into requirements for regulations for like whether it's our educator preparation frameworks or professional learning plans. And so, again, we want to make sure that, we're sending the message loud and clear that our state obviously is one of the most diverse states when it comes to our K-12 schools and our higher ed community. We have well over 100,000 first generation immigrant origin students in our colleges. We have, many undocumented students in our colleges. And, we want to make sure that whatever policies and frameworks we have in place, that go across K-12 and higher ed, that we are indeed addressing in a really robust way, the access, affordability, and opportunity issues that we need to make sure we're staying on top of.
And from the school perspective, obviously, maintaining a bully-free environment and an environment free of harassment of all kinds is at the focus or one of the focuses of what we do. But also realizing that for people new to the community, we have to be conscious of any perceived insensitivity. And that may be from their peers or it may be from adults. And, that takes purposeful and sometimes challenging conversations with our peers to make sure that the way that they are interacting with our students and conducting their daily business is open and insightful to the different perspectives of our students.
I think it feels really appropriate to me too, since I started with Frary to end with Frary. And I think thinking about critical consciousness raising and consciousness building in our teacher prep programs is extremely important. I think that there are lots of great examples of this in New York State. I'm very proud to work in New York State and to have been educated in New York State. And I think we can do better. And so I think this is why we do not want just a 1 hour slap a sticker on it. Let's talk about immigration. Okay, great, we're done. No, we want a robust policy reform where teachers, leaders, educators, and children have opportunities to talk about the intersectionalities of race, gender, class, sexuality, immigration. All of these things are equally important.
I'm just going to add that the students who are the most impacted by these policies are often students who are Black and brown. So, and so we just have to be very mindful that they're directly impacted by policies of deportation.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of the panelists and for all of those of you who are tuning in. If we could drop the links to the resources that we've collected around the CUNY-IIE Know Your Rights frequently asked questions page, UFT has shared guidance to support immigrant students and families in this current moment. NYSED has also shared guidance, and if you can find in the chat, the links to all of those are there. I want to thank you all again so much. You can find, like we mentioned throughout the webinar, our information on our website, as well as social media at CUNY-IIE. And we will be having our third and final webinar in early March. So please be on the lookout for those dates. And thank you all again. Really, really wonderful. You all shared such insights, such perspectives, such knowledge. Grateful for you all. Thank you all for watching and have a great night.